All right, folks, it's 6 o'clock, so we're going to go ahead and get started with our introductions because we have a lot of great content to cover for you tonight. My name is Annie Brones. I am an outreach and education specialist here at Tualatin Soil and Water Conservation District, and I will be your host tonight for Soil School. We're about halfway through the series. I hope everyone has been enjoying the sessions. We really enjoy being here with you all tonight. So Tualatin Soil and Water Conservation District works to create a sustainable, productive, and healthy environment for the Washington County community. We serve residents of the county by providing educational opportunities, advice about natural resource conservation, and sometimes even financial assistance to help you get those projects on the ground. Tonight, we're hosting this webinar. It's a series in partnership with West Multnomah Soil and Water Conservation District. Their mission is to provide resources, information, expertise to inspire people to actively improve air and water quality, fish and wildlife habitat, and soil health. They serve residents of Western Multnomah County, Sauvie Island, and a portion of the Bonnie Slope neighborhood with conservation planning, weed management, native plants, wildlife habitat restoration, and school and community gardens. So tonight we're here to talk about soil microbes. As we discuss this important topic, it's important for our district to acknowledge the original stewards, the indigenous people of the land, where we now provide conservation services and their deep and extensive knowledge of this land. We honor this land and its original inhabitants from time immemorial, the Tualatin Band of Kalapuya. They have lived and prospered by maintaining strong cultural ties to the land and through wise management of resources. The Tualatin Band of Kalapuya were signers of the Willamette Valley Treaty of 1855, which ceded their homelands to the United States in exchange for certain rights and benefits. They were subsequently removed from their homelands to the Grand Ronde Indian Reservation, where they became members of the Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde. Their descendants live on as tribal members today, carrying on the traditions and cultures of their ancestors, the original people of the land. Now, before we get started with the presentation, of course, we have to go over a few housekeeping tips. Tonight's webinar is being recorded and it will be uploaded to our YouTube channel, along with all of our presentations this month by the end of the month. A couple will be up sooner than that, but they should all be there definitely by the end of the month. We're gonna have at least 10 minutes for Q&A at the end of this session. If you're not familiar, there is a Q&A button down at the bottom of your screen. That's where we'd like you to input your questions as they come to mind. That's a great place to put them because you can actually upvote questions. If someone asks a question and you're like, that's a great question, I want to hear the answer to that, just go ahead and give it a little upvote. That will help me decide which questions to present to Jen if we have too many and we can only take a few. If you have comments or need help with technical issues, that's what you can use the chat box for. I will be monitoring that as well. And of course, we love to hear from you. Your feedback is very valuable to us. It helps us craft next year's presentations. So of course, we have a feedback form for you and we would be so honored if you took a few minutes to complete that. I'm gonna drop that link into the chat box. And now I'm very happy to present to you Jennifer Moore. Last spring, Jennifer joined the USDA Agricultural Research Service as a research soil scientist in Corvallis, Oregon. Her research will focus on soil health and soil carbon in forage, grass, and cover crop seed production systems in the Willamette Valley. Jennifer has over 25 years experience in soil science research, including work in multiple cropping systems and natural landscapes across the country. Before joining the Agricultural Research Service, Jennifer was the Climate Initiative Director at American Farmland Trust, the Western Soil Health Team Leader and with NRCS, and an Associate Professor of Soil and Environmental Microbiology at Texas Tech University. Whew. So now that our big introduction is done, it is time to get to it. Jen, tell us all about soil microbes.
Great, thank you. Thank you so much. Let me share my screen here. All right, hopefully we're good to go. Great. All right, I wanted to thank you, the Tualatin and West Multnomah Soil and Water Conservation Districts. What a great way to celebrate Earth Week with Soil School. So I'm very honored to be part of that group this year. I also wanted to extend a special thanks to Renee and Annie for the invitation to speak today on linking soil biology with soil health, introducing some of the ways you can qualitatively evaluate soil health in your field or your gardens. I think this is the third soil school event I have participated in, and hopefully next year we'll be back in person. That would be wonderful. So my goal today is to increase awareness and appreciation for the amazing living biological community below our feet. I'll start by defining soil health and outline some key soil functions. We'll go over who's down there and what they're doing and discuss how we can monitor or assess soil health in your system. So hopefully in the end, I'll inspire some more discussion and hopefully it'll help feedback on my end, areas to research, efforts on management impacts on soil health. So let's see. Okay. So building from the definitions that originated in the early 1990s, NRCS defined soil health as the continued capacity of soil to function as a vital living ecosystem that sustains plants, animals, and humans. I also like to use health as an adjective, and thus we can describe a healthy soil as a living system that supports a diverse, active biological community that aids crop production by providing essential functions. And so zoning in on the term function, there are many that are critical for agricultural production systems and for the ecosystem and the environment overall. So there's a bunch that I'm listing here. These include the decomposition of plant and animal residues, releasing and cycling plant available nutrients and enhancing plant growth. They also are involved in the formation of soil organic matter through that decomposition process. Physically, the soil must also function to allow for adequate air and water flow, which is driven by the structure of the soil. And a well-aggregated soil not only resists the erosive forces of wind and water, but it also helps water to infiltrate, filling the profile, filtering, and storing for future uptake by plants. A healthy soil is full of abundant and diverse soil organisms, which drive all of the functions listed on this slide and many more. And it includes unique functions such as forming symbiotic associations with plants like nitrogen fixers and mycorrhizal fungi that we'll talk about later. Soil microbes also help to detoxify pollutants and break down agrochemicals to help keep our soil and water systems clean. And the entire community in concert with plants helps to suppress weeds and keep populations in check to minimize pest and pathogens pressures. So overall, a healthy system is both resistant to minor environmental disturbances like drought or flooding events, and it's resilient to more extreme events like extreme drought, massive major flooding events, wildfire events, for example. So soils are amazing habitats for life. You probably have heard this already, but they're home to over 25% of all living species on Earth. The vast numbers of organisms below ground is quite staggering. In just a teaspoon of really rich, healthy soil, there can be millions to possibly a billion bacterial cells, many hundreds to thousands of different kinds of those bacteria. And in a shovelful, you can contain hundreds of feet of fungal networks. So healthy soils not only host vast biological abundance and diversity, but the living mass below ground is equally impressive. An acre of land is roughly half the size of a soccer pitch. So if we imagine an acre of healthy soil, there are between 8,000 and 10,000 pounds of soil organisms living below ground. That's equivalent to an African elephant on 1 acre of land. And so keeping that sort of analogy going, there is the equivalent mass of 4 to 5 cows worth of microscopic bacteria, fungi, algae, and archaea, all things we can't see with the naked eye. There's about a half to 1 cow weight of earthworms. There's about a sheep weight of protozoa, about 2 rabbits worth of soil fauna or animals like beetles, mites, springtailed centipedes, nematodes, etc. And thus, soil health and resilience depends on maintaining this diverse and robust biological community that, again, really can't emphasize it more. It's responsible for carrying out all of those important processes I described earlier. So let's look at a few specific examples linking soil biology with function. One of the most important functions is the formation of soil organic matter. This important property of soil is important for functions like nutrient cycling, all the way to combating climate change, and also storing and filtering our water. So it's critical for every environmental and ecological process we can think of. And it also helps to release nutrients over time through decomposition processes. And so traditionally, scientists thought that stable organic matter originates from the preservation of complex plant compounds that are resistant to decomposition. But we now know that forming stable organic matter is largely from dead microbial cells and their byproducts. These are kind of absorbed to particle surfaces. And so what's really important about that function is historically, we kind of viewed the soil and organic matter as this chemical property, and sequestration of carbon sequestration as a chemical property, but it's really how we maintain, feed, fuel, and cycle that biological community and their dead microbial cells that can contribute and help to combat some of the climate change that we're experiencing. Of course, the food that microbe needs primarily comes from plant sources, but seeing soil organic matter formation stemming from the actions of soil microbes supports the concept that managing for healthy soils should equate to managing for optimal biological activity and microbial biomass. So during decomposition, plant and animal residues are converted to plant available nutrients through a process called mineralization. So soil, I think I have a pointer here. So soil organisms take organic matter, they degrade it and break it down into parts. And so for every 1% of soil organic matter, there's about 10,000 pounds of carbon, 1,000 pounds of organic nitrogen, and about 100 pounds of organic phosphorus and sulfur. That's sort of like this long-term pool that's just hanging out in the organic matter. And over time, about 2 to 3% of that each year gets converted into plant available forms. And again, that's called mineralization. And those forms are like nitrate and ammonium for nitrogen, phosphate, sulfate, those types of compounds. So in about a year, you can release just from the natural decomposition process about 10 or 30 pounds of nitrogen and 3 to 5 pounds of sulfur and phosphorus. And also, it's important that that microbial biomass is also containing nutrients. So in that 1% organic matter, there's about 500 pounds of microbial biomass carbon, 50 pounds of biomass nitrogen, and 5 pounds of biomass phosphorus. And as those organisms they die and are decomposed, those cells also release some of that inorganic plant available nitrogen, phosphorus, and sulfur. This is a slide, I'll let it play a little bit. It's my reminder. I kind of joke that I'm microbe centric. I study soil microbiology and microbial ecology and biochemistry. And sometimes I forget about the larger organisms because I don't study them. But this is a really great video. It shows the decomposition of, in this case, leaf matter with soil fauna. So all of the larger organisms, including earthworms and centipedes and millipedes and beetles and all the, I call them the creepy crawlies, right, in the soil, with soil fauna and without, so just soil microbes. And it's a 15-week time-lapse video and the sources listed here for you. And you can see how quickly and, the mixing and the translocation from the surface below ground through the actions of the soil fauna. They're also stimulating the microbial population because they're chewing up all those large fragments of organic matter, and they're releasing, they're cutting it up, they're chewing it up, and it's kind of like similar to what we do when we eat food. We chew it up, we create smaller pieces, so we don't choke, but B, so the enzymes in our mouth and our gut can then go to work to release the nutrients that our food contains. And so that video is just my reminder, and now yours, that it's a whole community that's responsible for this, not just the microbes. Okay, so, but microbes are really incredible organisms. Here's one example of bacteria that team up with certain plant roots. These bacteria are involved in nitrogen fixation. So what they do is they come in and with plants like legumes, they form these little nodules, these little clusters on the roots. And inside of those nodules, they're taking atmospheric nitrogen. So about 80% of our atmosphere is dinitrogen gas, inert, doesn't do anything, but they take that nitrogen inside of that little nodule and they break it apart and they create ammonium. And in return, they give that to the plant. And in return, the plant gives them sugar and a nice protected home to live in that little nodule. And so this process is the biological nitrogen fixation, and it supplies a really incredible amount of nitrogen to our plants. So anytime you can incorporate a legume into your crop rotation as part of your cover crop mix, it's naturally going to take nitrogen out of the air and put it below ground for future plant use as that material then decomposes and degrades. I can't emphasize like how amazing this process is. We can do the same thing. Humans are very crafty. We can take nitrogen out of the air and break it up and form fertilizers, right? You can buy a bag of that at your local Home Depot. But it takes us an enormous amount of heat, pressure, oil. It's a very energy intensive process to do the same thing that a bacteria is doing right now on this nice spring day in the ground in concert with legumes. So really, really cool and a really important plant and symbiotic association to consider for your garden or your fields. Another really important symbiotic association is between plant roots and a fungus. So these are mycorrhizal fungi. Mycorrhizae, it's a Greek word meaning fungus root. And the fungus basically attaches itself to the plant root and then it extends out into the soil, increasing the functional rooting surface 10 to 40 times. I kind of think of it as like hair extensions, right? Like you're extending the area of well, in this case, the plant root. And when it can do that, it now has more soil volume to explore for things like nutrients and water. So it's really critical to help in that particular case. And similar to the bacteria with nitrogen fixation, the plants provide the microbe, in this case, the fungus, sugars. About 5 to 20% of carbon, usually in the form of some type of sugar, is allocated to the fungus. Again, in return, the fungus is now extending the rooting surface area. It helps bring phosphorus and nitrogen, sulfur back to the plant and also water. And there's also been some work done where these associations can help plants defend themselves against certain pests and diseases. And fungal hyphae are incredibly important for building soil stable aggregates. And we'll talk about those later on. So most plants are mycorrhizal. One exception would include the brassicas, which do not form these types of associations. So I wanted to point that out as well. So here are those stable aggregates that I mentioned earlier. So these are important for numerous functions like resisting the erosion, resisting water and wind erosive forces, and forming good structure for air and water flow. It's a physical property, but in reality, aggregate formation is largely a biological process. So there are two ways that soil organisms help form stable aggregates. The first is this physical enmeshment. So think of those fungal hyphae and plant roots. Here they're shown in this image. You can just see all of the roots as well as some of the fungal hyphae. They're encapsulating the soils and they're holding it together, kind of like a hairnet, hold your hair in place. The fungal hyphae and the roots are holding that soil in place in an enmeshment. There's also a biochemical process. So bacteria and fungi alike release sticky substances that help literally stick aggregates together and forms like a glue that helps hold these particles together, making them resistant to erosion. And so this is a really high-powered microscope. These are bacterial cells. And right here, you can see this is a soil mineral particle. And this is a little ooze coming out of the bacteria that's sticking that bacterium onto the surface of the soil particle. So a whole bunch of these guys get together and they help glue the particles together. This is another really high-powered image. Again, 2 particles. And then there's this thread-like material. A certain bacteria called actinobacteria also produce this sticky substance holding it together. And then finally up here, these are fungal hyphae. These are not mycorrhizal. These are involved in the breakdown of dead stuff, but they're also helping to enmesh and encase and hold those soil particles together. So I kind of think of it, their superpowers kind of similar to Superman, to oh my God, Spider-Man. I was gonna call him Batman for a second. To Spider-Man, right? With its strong thread-like substances that's holding the bridge or holding the bus that's almost falling off the bridge, and saving all the school children. Similarly, the fungal hyphae, the bacterial glues are holding those particles together, saving that soil from blowing off in the air or running off the field in water erosion. Okay, and so other plant roots and macrofauna, again, are really important. The larger organisms help to fragment, mix, and move those residues like I showed in that video. These organisms are sometimes called the ecosystem engineers because they're like the movers and the shakers of the soil. They're really important for creating large channels for water and airflow, so sometimes called biopores. They help also to create aggregates. They help microbes build organic matter. And in this particular case, I wanted to show that this is an earthworm channel. So earthworms, as they channel through the soil, release material out the other end. It's rich in organic matter, nutrients, it's a neutral pH, and it's very resistant to erosion. And so water can flow, air can flow in these channels. It's loaded with bacteria. And so when these channels are there, the roots can then take advantage of them. And they're kind of like in this primed environment to be able to get off to a healthy, strong start. Similarly, root channels themselves, this is radish or some sort of large rooted plant that as it decomposes, it's going to leave a large gap in that soil for that airflow. And as the material is degraded, it's also going to be a site of a hotspot of microbial activity. So leaving these channels in place are really important. When we till, we're disrupting these channels. And so we no longer have that kind of easy passage for the next root and the next crop to come in and take advantage of those channels for nutrients and water flow. And then just another plug for earthworms, like how important they are. They can turn over the top 6 inches of soil in 10 to 20 years. And so very, very important mixers and movers of organic materials. This is one of my favorite slides. Hopefully I can go through it here. So plants and microbes have this unique communication system that scientists are just beginning to decode. So for example, on the left, this plant is being attacked by a pathogen that's entering the plant through the stomata. This sends a chemical signal below ground that causes beneficial soil bacteria to come to the rescue and swarming the root to first protect the below ground system from any further attack. So that's kind of shown these, this dark image is a root, and these green fluorescently dyed substances are bacteria that are swarming the root. So they're good guys, they're beneficial organisms to help protect that plant below ground while it's being stressed above ground. These bacteria also release a chemical that goes back up to the plant, tells the plant, you're being attacked, close your stomata, right? Batten down the hatches, there's bad guys in the area, you need to protect yourself. So that's one form of communication above and below ground that plants and microbes use. There's also another instance where the plant is being attacked now through the stomata with, I think it's aphids. And in this case, now the plant is sending a volatile organic chemical. It's like a pheromone into the atmosphere. It's an SOS signal that if these wasps are nearby that can attack the aphids, they'll come in, they get the signal, and they swarm in, and then they can start to attack the aphids to reduce that pathogen or that pressure. Finally, there's another information signal below ground through those mycorrhizal fungi, the fungi that can attach to plant roots. In this case, this plant is being attacked on the left. The signal comes down now, it goes through the soil, through the mycorrhizal hyphae. Over here, this plant is not being attacked, but it's being told that its neighbor is being attacked. It will automatically then close its stomata to protect itself from the pathogen that is infecting through the stomata. So this whole communication that's going on. And this point over here with this diversified field border is these organisms, like these wasps and other pollinators are good guys, they need to be nearby to get these signals for the whole plan to work. So one way we can do that is to diversify plant pollinator habitats that'll also attract these beneficial organisms that can help reduce pest and pathogen pressure. That's really super cool. These are just a reminder of the fierce competition and population control that naturally happens in soil. First, this is just an example of roots grown in the presence of a particular pathogen, Rhizoctonia solani. On the left-hand side, the roots are grown in the presence of these organisms called springtails. On the right-hand side, they're grown without springtails. And so another reminder that it takes a community, and I'm not sure the mechanism, but in the presence of these organisms, the plant root is more healthy and able to resist and deal with the presence of this particular pathogen. So that's one example. The nematode trapping fungi are so amazing, right? So here we have this fungi, this little tiny thread-like substance. It creates a noose-like structure. And in this case, the nematode swimming through the soil water, it's attracted for whatever reason, maybe a chemical signal that the fungi is releasing. It swims through the noose. Another chemical signal happens and it clamps down on that fungi and starts choking the life out of it, basically. So you can just get an appreciation for the size of this tiny little fungus that is now attacking this huge nematode in relation. There's another mite that's preying on a nematode. Nematodes are super important. They tend to get a really bad rap because they tend to induce a lot of crop damage, and rightfully so, because it causes millions of dollars of damage every year. However, the majority of nematodes are really important and really good for nutrient cycling, and also they're involved, they eat everything. So they're also involved in population control. So keeping a nice healthy balance of all of these organisms is really critical. I just like the name of these guys. These are a protozoa called vampyriads, like vampires, and they puncture this particular fungus that's involved in take-all disease, and they puncture it and start sucking the life out of that fungus. A single protozoan, they love to eat bacteria. So this is a single protozoan. And again, this green fluorescent dyed are bacteria. This individual can eat billions of bacteria in a given day. So very, very important for population control. And then this last example is a soybean cyst nematode, one of those bad guys causing major crop damage to soybeans. And it's being parasitized by this fungus that just looks like some thread-like material in the soil, but it's killing this particular nematode. So fierce competition, you know, it really, it takes a whole community to keep everything in check. But when it's functioning well, there's a lot of population control that happens naturally that we can, you know, rely less on certain pesticides to accomplish. So how do we do that? So hopefully I've just convinced you that this below ground community, it's amazing, it's diverse, it's this active life force that's involved in every key soil function important for agricultural productivity and numerous ecosystem services. So the next question is, how do we manage for soil biology, soil health, and ecosystem resiliency? This was back from my days with NRCS. They have this great and really simple 4 principles of soil health, right? Minimize disturbance, minimize soil cover, maximize biodiversity. Sometimes people split it out with animals. I keep it in because animals are part of biodiversity, and also maximize a continuous living root. I like to even simplify a little bit further and talk about, feeding and protecting. So the left-hand side is feeding and fueling that soil biology, and the right-hand side protects soil organic matter and protects aggregates. A little bit more detail. So the first 2 principles, minimizing disturbance, maximizing cover. This is that armor of the soil. It's also not only protecting soil particles from erosion, it's also protecting that microbial habitat, those aggregates that Spider-Man, right, helped to form. And the organic matter is not only habitat, but it's also fuel for the biological community. And so when we do this, these help to reduce erosion, it reduces runoff risk, this keeps our soils, our fertilizers, our chemicals on site and out of waterways. Additional benefits include buffering soil temperatures, right? So we don't want major extreme temperature events to happen. Nature doesn't really like extremes. It doesn't do that well. So it helps to buffer and insulate the soil from temperature extremes. And it also reduces water loss from evaporation because we've covered the soil, reducing that loss from the soil surface. The other 2 principles, maximize continuous living root and maximize biodiversity. These principles aim to provide diverse carbon sources and biochemicals that fuel those soil organisms. So the other side doesn't really provide any new inputs. The left-hand side is where we need to provide those inputs to keep that system, that engine kind of running. And so this stimulates the plant microbe interactions that I talked about. It can help in resulting in breaking disease cycles, increasing, not just maintaining soil organic matter, enhancing nutrient cycling, and enhancing that predator and pollinator population I mentioned. So it's important to develop soil health systems rather than target single issues. With a systems approach, the underlying cause of the problem can be identified and addressed rather than just addressing the system. So although immediate action may be warranted to reverse concerns like erosion or salinity, not on the side of the mountains, but long-term management strategies that can regenerate the system are needed. So listed here are some management practices that support the 4 soil health principles. And although adapting a single practice may be a benefit, the best approach is to couple as many as possible to develop a whole system that addresses all 4 principles. So collectively, a soil health management system would stimulate below ground changes to the soil microbiome that translates into optimized system functioning and thus ecosystem resiliency. So this is especially, I think, important in the face of increasing weather extremes due to climate change, such as drought, intense storms, increasing temperatures, shifting those growing seasons, the reduced snowpack, and spring melts that the Pacific Northwest is facing, and of course, more frequent and intense wildfires. So the more resilient our system, the better we're both able to resist the impact of one of those threats, and when it does happen, to bounce back more quickly. So what are some examples? What are some options for you? So planting a cover crop, that's one of the best. It's also one of the more common initial starting points that people like to use. And I would encourage you to look for windows of opportunities, both in summer and winter, depending on what plants you're planting. And also windows of opportunity where in your landscape. So on the right-hand side here is hairy vetch. That's relay seeded between carrot rows, and that it's just showing that the carrot were planted in August, hairy vetch was seeded in early October, and the photo was taken late October. And then here's the hairy vetch that again was seeded between the rows, and the carrots were harvested in December. And this is just a reminder that when we plant some type of legume, like as a vetch, we do release some amount of nitrogen. This is plant available nitrogen in pounds per 1,000 square foot. There are two great references here. Cover crops for home gardens west of the Cascades. It's a WSU publication. One of our OSU scientists, Nick Andrews, contributed to that from Oregon. And then another one that kind of talks about managing cover crops for the home gardens is listed here. Mulch is your friend if you're trying to reduce tillage, which again disturbs the aggregates, it breaks up things, it releases more carbon to the atmosphere, and it destabilizes your soil, those big channels that we talked about earlier. Sometimes it might be necessary to do some form of tillage, but adding mulch can help you take steps to reducing tillage, maybe just tilling in little strips and working your way up to a full no-till system. Anything you can do to reduce the frequency, the timing, don't till when it's too wet or too dry, how deep you go, and then the location. All of those things can be steps in the right direction towards a full soil health management system. Diversify in and around your garden or your field. Don't forget about borders. Those can be really valuable areas to look at. Consider rotating beds with perennial crops, as you can rotate out different disease cycles, for example, and then you just help to kind of set the stage if that's something that you can do. Animals are a great integrative tool. Of course, if we're talking about vegetable production, you need to think about human safety with that and timing. And I'm not an expert in that, but there are lots of good extension publications on that to help you with that. But they're a really great tool in the garden as well. And so, how am I doing? We're at 35 minutes.
You're doing great, Jen. I think we only have about 3 questions, so I think going all the way to 350 is fine. Okay.
So this is just some examples of what happens in managing for soil health and soil cover. And I just wanted to emphasize there's soil temperature, and then remember those extremes in temperature. So diurnal temperature range is the difference between the max and the min on each day. And what we discovered in Texas, in a lot of the work that we were doing there, is that it wasn't so much the average soil temperature that mattered for plant stress. It was that big range in temperature swings. So in our bare ground, this is how much of a difference between min and max we had versus the vegetated ground. So this is the surface top 4 inches, and you can see the bare ground in red was much higher, this diurnal temperature range, than the vegetated surface. And then that persisted down about a foot into the soil. And what we found was that it was the lower the DTR, the lower the microbial stress, and the lower the plant stress. So the more vigorous and healthy plants were as well. So just another layer of information that we were finding really interesting. And then I gave this talk to some viticulturalists, and they recognize that cool soils may be an advantage in warm climates because they can slightly delay ripeness, and that could enhance certain flavors. So the terroir of soil is related to all of these things: the microbes, the temperature interactions, the moisture, etc. And so how we manage for that can have an impact not only on our yield, but on the quality of the fruits that we're generating. This is a great publication by USDA ARS scientists. This is work out of California, again, where they're looking for unique ways to incorporate cover crops into vegetable systems. And so, you can plant cereal rye in the furrow bottoms in this particular case. or these were cereal rye on the bed tops, and just different ways to incorporate, look for unique ways to get cover to protect those areas. One thing that was interesting is that they found that the vegetable yields were greater in the areas that had more cover crop, more frequency of cover crop, than those that were just that were less frequently cover cropped, and that they were also greater yields than compared to just mulching with like compost or something. So that living root was really important to help, again, make that vegetable system more resilient and more productive. So that's an example of that. This one comes up just about fumigation. Probably not really relevant to home gardens, but the takeaway message is that each bar is a different type of bacteria. So the more bars, the more diverse the system. So this one's a native system. And this is what the population looks like. These two bars are two different types of chemical fumigants to combat one of the pathogens. So you can really see that, you know, it knocked down the diversity of the soil. It temporarily knocked down the pest, but what they found was that that pest then just bounced back. What they found even more compelling was vermicompost. So that's composting with worm castings. And when they added this to the soil, they were able to keep and maintain that diverse population. And one of the organisms, or a whole group of organisms, was able to then combat and minimize the impact of that pathogen in the soil. So the point is that sometimes there's really cool organic amendments, such as vermicomposting, that can achieve the same thing without the environmental negativity of, in this case, chemical fumigants. So I just found that to be very interesting. And then that always leads to questions about, well, what about adding biologicals to the soil? You know, there's like bugs in a jug, or, you know, different amendments that have been promoted. And some of them work and some of them don't. And part of the issue is that they're not very well regulated, and there's not a consistent standard that people can rely on. I think that there's great promise and potential in these products. And so if you try them, I would maybe not go all in on them, but try them in a portion of your field, set up a nice trial with a control, and see if they're worth the money, because they're often quite expensive. Hopefully, you know, with more research and more effort in this area, we'll be able to identify certain populations of beneficial bacteria and fungi that can help stimulate plant growth and knock down the bad guys. And then this is just a reminder that depending what we plant, we can change the composition of the microbial community just by changing the plants we grow. And so these are different cover crops: clover, oat, vetch, and wheat. Again, the different bars are different types of fungi in this case. And so the clovers really stimulated arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi, same with the vetch. So these legumes really stimulated that symbiotic mycorrhizal fungi association I mentioned earlier. Other crops like wheat just kind of had greater diversity, and the oats kind of stimulated the saprophytic fungi. Those are organisms that break down dead stuff. But the point is that by mixing and introducing new crops into your rotations, in your rows, in your cover crop mixes, we can help stimulate and change and diversify the population for the better. I'll skip that one. Let's see. Okay, and then this one is just a reminder again about aggregate stability, cover, protecting the soil. I think a picture says a million words in this case, right? So on the left-hand side, this is a vineyard with a cover crop. The right-hand side, no cover crop following a winter rain. So you can see this soil is not well aggregated because the water is not going in. It's ponding on the surface. It is running off. It's evaporating off. It's not getting in the ground where the plants need it later on. And so really important for water recharge, water storage, water availability, and water quality. So anytime we can avoid this is a good thing for lots of reasons, even fish populations, right? We can talk about really important stuff. And then there's that Spider-Man helping to aggregate the soil to help resist that erosion and get the water in. Okay, and then I'll just end with this and a couple of slides. There's a whole guide put out by NRCS. I helped to develop it before I left. It's a field assessment. The website is listed here. It requires no fancy equipment. It requires no expensive equipment, just your hand, a shovel, and some things you can pick up at the dollar store if you don't already have them in your house. And it's a great guide. It kind of goes through and it tells you if you have a soil health resource concern or not. I'll just kind of preview it that there are different indicators. You don't have to go through all of them. The guide will walk you through it, telling you what time of year to sample, how to do it, and what the implications of the results are. So surface things are looking at cover, looking at surface crusting or cracking, looking at how quickly your residue breaks down or whether you're ponding water on the surface. Physical is this penetration resistance. You can use a fancy tool or you can use a wire flag. The guide talks about that. Looking at the structure of your soil, the color can tell you a lot. There's a really fun way to do aggregate stability that the guide goes through. It's super inexpensive and easy. And then a couple of ways to look at the biological properties, those biopores, the big ones from the root channels are earthworms, what your roots look like. And if you're lucky, biological activity, although that's a little bit harder to see with the eye. So this website is another link to it, and it goes through it. And I would be happy to help anybody. You can contact me and we could go over that later on. So I think I can end and ask and wait for questions. Is that a good stopping point?
I think that sounds great.
Okay.
Yeah.
Here, I'm gonna pull up my last slide here. So I'm just gonna skip through these. This just kind of goes through a little bit more closely. But here's my email and also my work cell phone number. So if anybody has follow-up questions, I'd be happy to talk with anybody about designing a little study on your garden or your field at any point. Thank you.
Very cool stuff, Jen. That predation slide was really neat. Oh man, it's a cutthroat world down there, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah. If you believe in reincarnation, you don't want to come back a soil microbe.
Oh man. Okay, so we have a couple questions. Okay. One of them, I think I can answer easily by saying that these slides will be shared with folks. So I will follow up with an email to everybody. And so the key functions page, all these reports that she's referenced, these great resources, everything that's in this presentation, I will get into your inbox. Absolutely. So, all right, this is a fun one, Jen. What is your favorite soil microorganism and why?
I have to pick just one. That's like asking me, like, what's my favorite kid? I like actinobacteria, and one of the reasons is that they were sort of misclassified back when I was in school. They were kind of bacteria, kind of fungi, and then they discovered through DNA that they're actually bacteria. So and they're really important for breaking down hard to degrade materials. Like woody material, they're often common in, they're found everywhere. They can be in really high pH or arid environments. They're in our gardens. And one of the cool things they also release is geosmin, which is that earthy smell. So, when you're working in your garden and you kind of get that earthy smell, that smell is from actinobacteria that are actively breaking down organic matter and they're releasing this volatile organic chemical called geosmin. And so I think it's stimulating, and it's a rich smell, and I just think that they're super cool. So that's my favorite organism.
I love that. And that actually gives me an idea for a question that makes me think of petrichor, which is the smell that you get when it rains, after it recently rains. And I was wondering if is that related to anything happening in the soil?
I bet it is. I don't know that term, but I would argue, I would guess that it's a stimulation and a flush of a chemical, a biochemical that's released by organisms that are stimulated by that rain event. Yeah, I don't know. I know also, just on the smell thing, that there's a lot of work in gardening, and how it's there is like a true biochemical signal in our brains that it makes us happy, right, to dig in the soil. And so they use it for therapy and all sorts of great things. So it's not only good for feeding us, but it's also good for the mind. So I wanted to point that out too.
Absolutely. Grow your own food. It's good for the planet and good for you. Okay.
Oh, and I'll say one more thing, that smell, we used to include it. It's in one of the former soil health field assessments, but the smell of your soil can also tell you something, especially if you're adding a lot of compost and organic materials. It can go anaerobic on you, and you don't really want that to happen. So you need to aerate it a little bit. Or add more coarse material. So if your soils are smelling kind of acid, or like yucky smelling, that's a bad sign. But that nice earthy smell is a good sign of a nice, healthy, active population. Mm-hmm.
Okay, we've gotten several more questions that just popped up. So let's see. If you plant cover crops in the fall, winter, what do you do with them in the spring when you want to plant your vegetables?
Yeah, so that guide I showed talks about that specifically. Each cover crop and each crop you're planting has different timings. So there's different ways that you can go about killing the cover crop. Obviously, you could chemically kill it, like with Roundup or whatnot. Depending on the size, some people like to roller crimper it. So you can get like a big barrel of what, something full of water and roll it over. It depends on the size. I'm assuming this is a small garden. You could mow it. You could have some animal eat it. There's lots of ways that you want to kind of knock it down right before you plant your veggies. And in that case, again, you can do strips instead of tilling the whole thing under. That would be another option. But if we can avoid tillage, it's better. But it might take some practice there. So there's lots of different tips and tricks, and the second a reference on that one slide talks about managing cover crops for home gardens, and I would highly recommend that one.
On a similar subject, do you have any suggestions for what cover crops are well suited to home gardens?
The first one talks about that one. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And there's also, I can send it in an email, and you can, or I'll try to add it to the slide before I send you the slides. The NRCS, the Plant Materials Center here in Corvallis, Oregon, has a cover crop selection tool. And it's really easy to use, and you kind of put in your criteria, whether you want it for biomass or for weeds or for nitrogen, and it tells you which crops you can choose. And then another great resource is available through SARE, Sustainable Agriculture Research and Education, managing cover crops for profitability, and that's a free resource, and I can provide a link to that when I send the slides in. So it really depends. The cover crops are amazing, and they're frustrating because there's so many functions, and unfortunately it's the cop-out answer of, well, it depends. It depends on what your goal is. there's different camps of whether you go all in on a really complex mix or you try to, gain a little bit of successful, operation with, 1 or 2 species. The more complex, the harder it is to kill non-chemically because they all kind of mature at different times. And so you kind of have to ask yourself, what do you want to do? What's your main goal? And then what grows best in the region that you're at? Yeah.
Yeah, we've got quite a bit of questions that are a little bit specific. So I think including those resources in the slides will be really helpful to folks.
Yeah.
Specifically, if you could provide a resource for folks that are not gardeners and not farmers. A lot of people here are telling people about how important living soils are, especially for sequestering carbon. And so if you can provide suggestions in the slides about where, non-gardeners can learn about this subject and kind of just get a taste for the magic of soil that we're all into.
Yeah, for sure. If it's about carbon sequestration and climate mitigation, that kind of thing, when I was with NRCS, myself, a scientist from the from NRCS, and oh my gosh, the climate hubs. I'm sorry. We put together a really nice 4-page document that links soil health to climate mitigation in the Pacific Northwest. So if you please help me remember to send you that link. I can definitely do that. I think it talks about it pretty, high level and talks about the implications and why we want to employ these. Pretty much anything we do that builds organic matter in the soil, half of organic matter is carbon. And so if we're making more organic matter, we are storing more carbon in our soils. The trick is to keeping it stored. And then I'll just say that it's not only storage, because if all of the carbon was stored in soil, then none of it would be available for microbes. And so it's the holy grail is to manage carbon, the flow of carbon, while increasing that long-term stable pool. So we want to kind of balance it between the two. We don't want to hoard it all, because then otherwise the whole food system would collapse. But we want to increase it just enough while we're kind of cycling a different pool over here, if that makes sense.
Okay, I'm gonna try to combine some of these questions so we can get through the rest. Someone is asking about beneficial insects, and I'm going to actually refer them to our website for that one, because we have a beneficial insects webinar coming up actually very soon. So go to our website and go to the same page that you found out about this. I can send the link in the chat, but definitely sign up for our beneficial insects workshop. We will teach you how to attract them to your property to take care of pests. Okay, and then if you could give us a quick answer on this, although I'm sure you could go into more detail. How deep do you go into the soil to have that be considered tillage? So if you're mixing your cover crops into the soil, is it just like a couple inches? Is it like 6 inches? How do you cross that threshold?
Well, any tillage is tillage, but the impact of that tillage depends on how you do it. So like a moldboard plow literally flips the soil upside down. It takes that 6 to 8 inch chunk and it flips it. It's very disturbing. Whereas some of the there's for gardeners, there's more of a rotary one that kind of does this action, and it only goes a little bit into the surface. It's still disturbing, but it's not as disturbing as, it's like taking a bulldozer, right, and just demolishing your house, as opposed to like a tree falling on a little section of it that you can repair, right? And so if you think of the soil as like the foundation, how much you disturb it is gonna, make an impact on how long and what's it gonna take to rebuild it, kind of thing. Is that quick enough?
Yeah, I think that's great. All right, last 2 questions. Both were upvoted, so important for folks. One, can you provide key elements at making home compost?
Oh,
And what is one item you would add to improve your soil?
Organic matter compost is a great tool, but really you could do it through cover crop. Like it's a living cover, it's a living mulch, it's a living compost, right? I can't tell you, I'm actually a really horrible composter. Our city does, municipal composting. And so I let the professionals do it. There's great resources out there. I could definitely provide some resources if I'm sure you guys probably have some through the conservation district, but yeah, I mean, it's all about balance and you'd think I'm this awesome scientist, right? That should be able to, and I could if I put the time into it, but between kids and work and everything, it's just not happening. So
You are a soil explorer. That's how I like to think of scientists. Y'all are out there forging the way into the unknown.
Yeah, I say anytime you can have it grown and done for you on site, it's one less step too. I'm also a little bit lazy when I garden, and so if I can grow it and then like let it decompose naturally on the surface, it is compost in a sense, but that's a cop out.
So we are just at 7 o'clock. I want to thank you so much, Jen, for joining us today. I'd also like to thank everyone who tuned in. Lots of great questions. Some of them it's hard to answer because it really depends, but I will follow up with the presentation and some other, I've been taking down notes. Hopefully we can follow up with all sorts of resources that will help you guys. And in the meantime, please check out our website. In the chat, there's a bunch of links to our website. We have all sorts of great resources like how to make a compost bin and learning about soil. So if you have friends and family that just kind of want to get, a little bit of an introduction to soil health, that's a really great place to go. And for your deeper soil questions, please contact Jen or contact us at Tualatin Soil and Water. We are here to help you. So thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you. Have a good night.